feel like everything is just about to spring open and begin on a whole new frontier, quite literally, that we have been through the last several decades since World War II of secrecy, government hiding, back engineering of technology that none of us have seen. And something is happening in 2016 as if there is a pivot in the timeline. Everybody is feeling it. There's more and more whistleblowers that are coming to me and to others in the year when this government and other governments may finally announce to the entire planet that we're not alone in this universe. And that is thrilling to me. That much is thrilling.
Who are they to tell us, our government, what's better for us or what we could know or what we shouldn't know? And as you mentioned, people coming out now with stories of their participation in government, all these government projects, for instance, that there were reverse engineering, as we know from Bob Lazar almost 30 years ago, closer to 28 years ago at this point. There's been so much more, rather than just the Bob Lazar case in the 90s that we talked about, that we have in the last few years. And we were all taught that there was no planets outside of our solar system. Yet every single day they're finding new planets. Everybody who is 21 or 22 at this point, or younger, or absolutely young, 22 or younger, has been born after they had found the first extraterrestrial planet and after they found the first possible Goldilocks planet, which I think changes the perception of everyone, Linda.
And you're making the perfect point that we actually went through the 20th century with this archaic, bizarre notion that was being taught in schools, that the only life in the universe was on this planet, and that the planets in this solar system were the only ones like Earth in this entire 13.9 billion light-year universe. To think that academics for centuries have accepted these ideas is almost incomprehensible, and that as we've moved into the 21st century and at year 16 in this 21st century, it is beginning to feel like so many old ideas are being broken open socially, politically, scientifically, psychologically, and that's why I feel exhilarated. I have always honored the truth, the pressure of fact, more than anything else. And to have been alive realizing that the government of the United States has been lying through its teeth since World War II for reasons that are still not quite clear, and that we have grown up in a country so schizophrenic about what is truth, and that is what is fueling this current strange presidential year. People are totally aware that we are in a government that has lied and lied and lied and keeps on lying. And how can the United States of America continue in through the 21st century if we don't get out of the business of lying and we get back into the business of truth and absolute clarity and a nation in which the masses of, by, and for the people are exactly what the government was intended to be, which we are so far from now. And that part of this whole huge underbelly of all the government lies and the disrespect that everybody feels now goes right to the heart of suppressing and lying about other life forms and alien presence on this planet, throughout this solar system, throughout the universe. And the more I think about it, the more it is like a Dr. Strangelove Voltairean satire. How could the people on this planet have been kept for so long under the control of a handful of people who had power, and the power was derivative from, and that's the question mark, derivative only from gold on Earth or derivative from some link to the alien presence on this planet? And are we finally in the 21st century going to go through some kind of a liberation, an actual liberation from all of the lies?
One thing that bothered me so much specifically about this country versus anywhere else in the world, when this topic comes up of intelligent life from other planets, other solar systems, possibly even other galaxies, that obviously to other countries, they take it seriously, they've been taking it seriously, or they just didn't quite believe as much as some of the hardcore believers here did 20, 30, 50 years ago. But they never instituted the ridicule system that America had. And one thing that I've seen that's been great change is every documentary I've watched from the early 80s throughout the 80s, throughout the 90s, and it was about mid-2000s when I first watched the Ancient Aliens 2-hour special, right? And in that, of course, there were skeptics in there. There was this professor, a PhD with a mohawk who was mocking this issue. But then that show turned into a series. All of a sudden, on every mainstream network, there seemed to be a show covering classic stories such as Roswell to the Socorro, New Mexico incident, to everything else out there without having to share time with skeptics. There used to be 1 minute for, the person, a witness, and 1 minute for a skeptic. Now we are just finally able to break through that, which to me was a huge change.
Right, and one of the refreshing changes, evolution, is that Mike Brown, who is an astronomer at Caltech, he has been leading the way for the last 13 years on discovering things in our own outer solar system, which is where the Kuiper Belt goes to a big gap that goes to the Oort cloud, and the Oort cloud goes out there at least 1,000, 1,500 astronomical units. It's a long, long way, and that he has discovered all kinds of things, including in 2003, he discovered it's ERIS, and some people call it Iris, some people call it Iris, but that is a body that Mike Brown found that was larger than Pluto, and it was Mike Brown who did the book, I'm the One Who Slayed Pluto, and It Had It Coming, which was his joke that when they found that there was an icy body out there in the Kuiper Belt that was bigger than Pluto, that astronomers could no longer say that Pluto belonged in the planet category, because if they weren't going to call Eris a planet and it's larger than Pluto, then they needed to knock both of them down to what they call an icy dwarf planet. That's been that revolution about Pluto. Well, now there was a release that they have now found in more of Professor Brown's work that one of the puzzles was another discovery 13 years ago. It was a red object moving out between the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud, and it was pretty large, pretty red, and they came to the conclusion that this was another icy planetoid, some people called it, that had the bizarre, huge, looping, elliptical orbit that they could not understand. It was a true mystery to every astronomer on Earth. How can this body with this huge looping elliptical orbit be out there? Okay, that's what set in motion a whole bunch of investigations of that part of our solar system. And then they discovered there were 13 objects. One was Sedna and 12 more. And they were all grouped together with these strange elliptical orbits. And finally, Professor Brown at Caltech, working with some other astronomers, they finally, crunching on a computer, he told me it was just maddeningly frustrating for so long, they finally started getting a picture through the help of the computer that these 13 bodies with these bizarre elliptical orbits had to be like that because of a gigantic gravitational mass that was attracting all of these 13 bodies into a group. And that's what led them to calculate that for those 13 bodies to be doing what they're doing on their orbit in this solar system, that this object, which nobody has yet seen, has to be at least 10 times the mass of our planet Earth. Now, mass is different from diameter, depending upon how much metal, rock, ice, water, any given body has. The mass will be either higher or lower. Well, in this case, they're pretty much sure that this object is just like Neptune, only a bit smaller, and that it will be gaseous. It will be mostly hydrogen and some helium, and that in terms of the expectation of where it is, they have been able to calculate on a computer what they think is a pretty accurate orbit, and the orbit is projected from the computer based on what the computer has hard data from those 13 objects. And they think that the swing of the orbit, that means from the closest it ever comes to the sun to the furthest it ever comes, it's swinging between 10,000 years to 20,000 years is its orbit. So that the closest approach would be more than 3 times the so-called controversy that Zecharia Sitchin had proposed back in the late 70s of there being a Nibiru planet that orbited in our solar system every 3,600 years, carrying Anunnaki on it, and that every time something is found in our solar system, everybody says, is this Nibiru? And this cannot be, because if the 3,600 number were correct from the cuneiform that Sitchin said that he was translating from the original ceramic plates in Mesopotamia and went into his books, the truth is, because I've sure interviewed a lot of astronomers about this, there is not a single object known anywhere in this big, vast, huge solar system that goes all the way out the half a light year to the edge of the Oort cloud. There's nothing that has a 3,600-year orbit that has been able to be calculated, or that there's any evidence on the Earth of anything that cycles like that. So now, so people will understand this new Planet 9, because of its size, that's why it's being called a planet, and that it is 7 times further from the sun than the Neptune is from the sun. It's way out in the far, far reaches in the what's called the mid-Oort cloud, and that the orbit, this big, long, looping orbit that on the computer graphics is completely opposite of Sedna and those 12 other bodies, that it would take this big Neptunian planet between 10,000 and 20,000 years to complete an orbit around the sun, but it never, stress this, it will never, ever come through our solar system. The closest it will ever get is out way, way, way far beyond Sedna and Pluto.
One thing, this might be a little bit deviating, and of course I want you to bring it back. This is one thing that's always confused me, and it doesn't make sense. We live in a three-dimensional world. Obviously, planets are round. Why does it, all the portrayals and even the astronomers I've had are astrophysicists. I remember we had one from Harvard, actually the director of astrophysics at Harvard, and talking about, the solar system, the Milky Way. Why would they be in a flat orbit as opposed to a three-dimensional? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, for instance, if we have
Well,
the
they
sun.
are three-dimensional. My God, we have things in this. Pluto. Pluto is on a bizarre orbit that goes way, way off of the flat plane, so-called flat plane. If you look at the graphics of the 13 objects, they're flying all over the place, but they're all in one section. That's the thing. Gravitationally, the only thing that would make sense, when you've got a big, massive body, what does it do? It increases gravitational attraction to anything that is around it. That's mathematically, when you look at the beautiful, it is a graphic that was produced at Caltech, and it's based on the actual computer projection of the real orbits of the 13 objects and the projected orbit of Planet 9. And when you look at those and you see, no wonder the astronomers were so confused 13 years ago. They had Eris, then they had Sedna, then they started finding all these other bodies, but they are going flaring off into these strange, bizarre elliptical orbits, quite different from the flat plane of the rest of the solar system.
You make such an important point, and for those people out there who aren't quite understanding the physics of this, obviously the larger the mass of a planet, regardless of what it's made of, like for instance Jupiter, its mass has the ability with the gravity to attract so much. That's why there's so many moons surrounding that planet. And
well, there's only 4 around Jupiter. There are several dozen. I think it's way over 30 now around Saturn.
That's what. Okay, so that was the one that had
Jupiter.
an enormous.
Yeah, it's Jupiter that has the 4 moons, one of which Io is constantly having volcanic eruptions. They never stop on Io because of the dynamic force between the massive Jupiter and the moons themselves. If you think about this, that Jupiter has so much gravitational attraction because of its large mass, that it basically is agitating those 4 moons that orbit it all of the time. Those 4 moons are never without agitation by gravitational pull. And that's why Io is, I believe, is the closest, and it's in a constant state of agitation, always belching lava. The other 3 moons are bigger and in different orbits, and they are quite interesting. Ganymede and some of the others, there's even contemplation that they may have water, and like we know Enceladus does around Saturn. In fact, Enceladus is the moon around Saturn that they have discovered that at the bottom of a 30-mile deep water, they know it's water and ice, that there is 194 degree Fahrenheit heat from what has to be radioactive matter inside of that moon that keeps it that hot. And that means that as far away as it is from the sun, orbiting Saturn, that the water heated by the radioactive material from the core at 194 degrees all the way up to the surface, that the likelihood that we will find some form of life there is high. This is coming from astronomers. And that's why one scientist said to me, I think we are getting close to the announcement that everybody needs to know that we're not alone in this universe, and that it doesn't matter if it's going to be microbes on Mars or swimming creatures on Enceladus. That's the why that quote. That we are in a solar system that with every passing month we are finding new information that are coming from the various probes, and that what we thought when we were growing up as kids and being taught exactly as you said, that this was the only Earth in the universe and the only place for life. Clearly there's water all over the place throughout this solar system, and where there's warm water, which is being heated on Enceladus, warmth plus water on Earth automatically means life here.
I'm glad you brought that up because for decades, if not centuries, whenever they discovered this, they always assumed that the light from the sun was integral in life. However, we've proven that right here on Earth, at the deepest, darkest parts of the ocean, where there should be no life, there are fissures in the Earth that are bringing up the heat from the core, and life is thriving down there. That expands their search tenfold, if not much more, and that's why this moon, which essentially could be a planet, because a moon essentially is something that's orbiting something else.
In astronomy now, because of all the controversy about Pluto versus the size of Eris and Sedna and so forth, the definition of a planet now, it has to be spherical. It has to have a certain, we'll call it lower, they've cut off a place that which is a planet has to be X mass or X diameter versus anything smaller is automatically going to be in a planetoid, like a dwarf planet category. So right now, the size of Planet 9 is so big, it automatically is a planet. Eris, however, which is larger than Pluto, is not meeting the mass size or the diameter size that has now been accepted as the definition of a planet. So there has been more organization within astronomy just because of the discovery of these icy planetoids out beyond Pluto, the change of Pluto, the controversy, the fact that this planet really did care about Pluto being the ninth planet, and how dare you astronomers demote it. But there has to be some kind of discipline in science. And if the size of Pluto ends up being smaller than several pure ice bodies in the Kuiper Belt you can see, they had to do something. They had to organize this in a way that a planet meets this criteria and everything else is in a different criteria. So that's what's happened.
And this obviously goes to show how much has changed in just the last couple decades, and specifically even the last few years. Yes, compared to 500 years of telescopes and looking into the stars, and even if you go back to the ancient times and the Egyptians building things according to how the Sirius star system or Orion star system, the point being is obviously we've discovered so much more now, and this begged this question it bothers me to wonder if the government has known about all this and has let us find it out for ourselves, because we know that they've been hiding craft. We know they've been hiding people, intelligent life, dead bodies, even living bodies are throughout the world in bases. Yet, and we hear stories from people who have worked from the underground projects that we have technology, as such as Ben Rich, who told in 1976 to Jen Harzan and other engineering students that we have the technology to take ET home. So I'm wondering, how much did the government really know, or whoever's in charge? Because sometimes I'm wondering, I don't know if it's the government anymore. I'm starting to think it might be the private corporations who don't have to answer to anybody.
And what is buried inside of those private corporations. And if, in fact, there has been an alien presence on planet Earth for 270 million years, as I was told by a man who retired from the DIA, and that number shocked me. He said that the government has proof. I don't know the proof. I have some ideas about it, but 270 million years puts in perspective the idea that only 2 million years ago was the first standing up primate on this planet in Africa that we call Lucy. and that from Lucy, there were genetic manipulations that started producing various models of standing up primates. And 2 million years later, from Africa to Europe and going through several types, and Neanderthalensis being the one previous to Cro-Magnon, Homo sapiens sapien, which is us, that the Neanderthalensis life form didn't know that it was going to be replaced by Cro-Magnon, Homo sapiens sapien, and neither did any of the others. So the standing up primates, this is important, underscore this, the standing up primates in evolution have never had control over what was happening to them. Not ever. The DIA guy said that they know that the extraterrestrials, and that there's supposed to be a competition among at least 3 groups out there. What exactly they compete over is, to me, a big question. But assuming that's true, at least 1, maybe 2, or maybe all 3 have been mixing and matching genes on planet Earth to create all kinds of life form, including the dinosaurs. And that means that the alien presence, not broken down into the details of precisely what it is and what its agendas are, but at least saying an alien presence is what has been in charge of planet Earth. And if it's been in charge of planet Earth for 270 million years, competing factions, humans have been manipulated from the moment that Lucy took breath. And that means to me that we are still being monitored and manipulated today. But I don't feel fear about it. I feel an exhilaration of finally feeling that we are starting to get glimmers of truth about where we came from, why there is such a disconnect between humanity and this earth, why there is not more identity to the earth and all life as something to be cherished as opposed to things that should be killed to eat or use. There is some strange separation between current humanity and feeling some sort of intimate resonance with all life. That's missing. That is missing from the current brand of humanity. Why is that? Were we this model, were we made to be violent for some reason we do not know? If you put all that together and you say that there is a spiritual force and it is real and it is vital and it may have arguments about what life forms are doing with other life forms, and that there may be a problem with so much cloning and hybridization, that we are in a universe that maybe cyclically it adjusts where things are going wrong. The planet right now, how could things seem to be so precarious as they are now? They just moved the atomic clock, or the midnight doomsday, they call it the doomsday clock. Mm-hmm. They just moved it to 3 minutes before midnight, which is supposed to be the apocalyptic end of everything. It has not been at 3 minutes before midnight for decades. Everybody knows it's precarious. Everything feels precarious. Everybody wonders if some fool is going to launch a nuke. But in this kind of agitation, I think it is also, the vibration feels like this could all go much more positive, not negative. And that is, maybe that's the bottom line challenge for Homo sapiens sapien. Would they get to the brink with their violence and pull back and start adjusting what they're doing that is causing the planet to artificially warm? Would they pull back from unleashing nuclear missiles that would destroy almost everything? Are humans in this petri dish beginning to learn that they must moderate their reactions to themselves, to the planet, to everything around them, if the planet and humanity is going to survive? And at a soul level, that reincarnation is the machinery of this universe, that the recycling of souls in and out of containers is the whole bottom line game, that it is what the divine field set in motion to grow educate, and evolve souls, then we keep doing this, that the souls keep doing this, until finally the souls reject out of hand violence and domination of other life forms.
There's a few things I want to say. First of all, when you were at Kirtland Air Force Base and you read that briefing, one of the statements that you said that every time I think about it, really, it shakes me to the core, but then obviously you get used to it and then you start thinking about the implications was when you read in that briefing statement that said that, correct me if the phrase is wrong, but it's all questions about human evolution have been answered.
Yeah, all questions and mysteries about the evolution of Homo sapien, and the Latin words were used, Homo sapien, on this planet have been answered, and this project is closed. And in the paper that I was given to read, that project was Project Garnet, Garnet, all caps.
And now, also going back to about the nuclear weapons, we have North Korea, the rogue nation, doing another test yet again, and we know now they're a nuclear country, and they're testing long-range missiles. And then you have all these wars that are going on, and the sad part is 2,000 years ago, go back even further to the Spartans. That is upfront bloodshed that would, destroy the psyche of any human, of any moral human. But now you stick an 18-year-old kid fresh out of boot camp in the Nellis Air Force Base in a little tiny bunker with a computer screen, which essentially is like a video game for them. And they're flying these drones across the world, taking off from Diego Garcia and literally bombing and killing people at a rate that is just unbelievable. And the disconnect that these youngsters have is, I think, doing nothing but harm, because they don't realize, they don't see up front and close what they're doing, that each of those numbers, that is, as their colonels or higher brass calls them, or targets, have lives. They have, families. They have brothers and sisters and mothers and, children and fathers, and we wipe them out like that, like they were nothing. And I think that is something that needs to change. One other thing I want to say, two things actually, is I'm sure you heard of Bob Lazar saying we've had 63 external corrections. And Dr. Roger Leir, before he passed away, bless his heart and his soul, he was an amazing man, as you know, he was believing to think that we are now undergoing the 64th correction to sort of get rid of that part of the brain that has that primal warfare instinct, because you have all these human-looking extraterrestrials that come to Earth, and they're peace and loving and all this, which also shows another thing. If they are truly Homo sapiens with the same DNA as us, then they were able to evolve to be better than the way we are.
I understand what you're asking, and I think that aren't we now at that philosophical conundrum? We're on a planet in which the priority in every direction that we look, from television to chat rooms to instant images, the emphasis is on the body and what the body wears and does. Where do you see any kind of global oneness about what the soul is? there's something so odd that death is when the animating force leaves the body, and that what leaves the body has been defined by Egyptians, Greeks, and ancient ideas for a very long time. At the moment of death, what leaves the body is the soul. So to me, the soul is the most important part of every single human. And if there are non-humans that are masquerading as human bodies, containers on Earth now, which I am convinced that is occurring, are there human containers among us, around us, that do not have any souls? Okay, I'm just putting that out as a rhetorical question for a second. Let it hang in the air. Or are we in a cosmos in which there is no such thing as a container that comes alive, whether it's a hybrid, whether it's a clone, whether it is naturally evolving life from some soup, is the machinery of the universe that anything that becomes alive with consciousness must automatically have a soul. Let that hang out there, along with some things may not have a soul. The thing that I think has impressed me out of everything I've ever been exposed to in the human abduction syndrome, and in a lot of discussions with Whitley Strieber about this, if the soul is really the whole end game of everything at the biggest box level, a divine field that created the matter world, that's the level at which I think of the divine field. It's not matter. It doesn't have entropy. It is alpha to omega. But the matter worlds, no matter how many universes, no matter how many parallel universes, it would all have been created by the divine field as an act, perhaps, of creating a gigantic school for what? Taking bits of itself and extending them out into matter that we would call souls, to see over an infinite period of time, would the infinite number of soul bits going in and out of all of these container consciousnesses throughout all of the endless times, eons of the matter worlds, on their own, would those bits choose to go back to the divine field versus staying in matter worlds? If something like that is occurring, then consciousness that evolves and gets higher automatically has to become less interested in the body container and far more interested in what is happening at the soul level. And maybe out of all of this, that when you look at this planet of 7.2 billion, maybe only 1,000 are going to go to the moment of death, and their souls are going to go to another dimension that will be beyond this matter world and matter universe, because they're going to go into another dimension where they will never have that schizophrenia again. There will never be any confusion at the next level that the soul is what it's all about, and that is a whole different training ground. And there, to me, in talking with Whitley and others, and a lot of people in the human abduction syndrome that 30 years ago were saying, Linda, I get the impression that some of the EBAs are studying what happens at the moment of death here because they are surprised. That this is an interesting statement. The non-humans are surprised at the soul that is now in the current crop of Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien, that the human soul at the moment of death is going to a dimension that they, the ETs, cannot go. When you think about these kinds of statements that have dropped and been woven through the human abduction syndrome investigations for at least the last 30 to 40 years, it always gives me pause when I think everything is just strictly biological entities from another solar system wanting to come and claim territory, harvest gold, or whatever. That I think something else is quite large and quite interstitial to the relationship between a divine field and the matter worlds. and that in fact, if you go to the avatars of history on the earth, why would a Krishna, a Buddha, or a Christ, let's just take those three, why would they have bothered to come and try to teach humans? Their perspective seemed to be of a completely different level than tribal warfare among Homo sapiens sapiens. But they were always referencing the soul level as if something had happened, as if humans are sort of unique. And there's one paragraph, I think it's Matthew, in the Christian Bible, and it in New Testament, and it is a statement that is given as a quote from Matthew hearing Christ, and the statement was, "He who believeth in him who sent me shall have everlasting life." And on the other side of that sentence is, "If he who does not believe in him who sent me shall not have everlasting life." Those are the two thoughts implicit in those words in Matthew, and it always has occurred to me that the him is not the God with a white beard and hair that was used in the Cecil B. DeMille movies about Moses. That it is a reference to something that is in another dimension, is not in this dimension at all, and that there are other dimensions that completely understand what is going on in this, we'll call it this matter existence. And they are waiting for evolutionary signs that the souls that go in and out of this matter dimension are growing and evolving so that they're going into these other dimensions, and that seems to be one of the aspects that the non-humans are themselves monitoring. And that if we knew the truth about what we are and what our souls really were and what they really did, I don't think anybody would have any fear about the whole planet being introduced to extraterrestrials.
Honestly, I don't think the planet should have any fear or would have any fear at this point at all, except for what the government has instituted. Let me just say two quick things for you, because we're running out of time. We got about little over 10 minutes.
2 minutes.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Yeah, and so what I wanted to say is a lot of people, Dr. Jacobs, of course, Yvonne Smith, and then the actual people who've been taken, Whitley Strieber, Jim Sparks, they all talk about the fact that when they're taken, that the smaller grays that they deal with, there's so many species out there, are essentially soulless. They're like bio-robots. And then when they get out...
Because they're androids. They're that were made to do work for the prime intelligence.
Exactly. And then so another researcher in England, is named by Nigel Kerner, wrote a book called Gray Aliens and the Harvesting of Souls. And I haven't had a chance to read that, but just the title of the book really struck me, because would they be, if they're soulless androids, would they be really trying to get what we have?
Well, that is the first discussion that I had with Whitley Strieber back at the year that he was still working on communion. And he and an abductee and I went into exactly that kind of discussion. That goes back to what, 1987, 86, somewhere in there. And that we had a long discussion where Whitley has the perspective that there really is a processing of souls, but not all. What is the difference? That is a lot of what we're dealing with. What is the competition between three geopolitical, territorial, conflicting extraterrestrial civilizations? What are they in conflict over? If it is if there's a political debate, an argument about what is allowable to do with life, it may be that the divine field that is responsible for souls and reincarnation, that it is upset at how much hybridization and cloning is now occurring, let's say, in this universe. That something is being upset. Some kind of natural balance that was supposed to persist is being affected. That might explain why Whitley and others have had this concept that souls, if not taken, that they can actually be processed by something trying to get information from souls. It's a very provocative idea. I think that it is one of those that people are not comfortable with because we all want to assume that the soul animus of our human container bodies cannot be interacted with by anything, anywhere, ever, except the divine field. I've always felt that. So, whatever the truth is, and we're just in layers of, it seems like a million layers of truths that need to be peeled off so we could actually understand what is going on. All of this universe, in the final analysis, as Michael Talbot wrote in The Holographic Universe, this universe, the entire universe, could be a schoolroom for advanced intelligences.
Projects, for instance, that there were reverse engineering, as we know from Bob Lazar almost 30 years ago, closer to 28 years ago at this point. There's been so much more, rather than just the Bob Lazar case in the 90s that we talked about, that we have in the last few years. And we were all taught that there was no planets outside of our solar system. Yet every single day they're finding new planets. Everybody who is 21 or 22 at this point, or younger, or absolutely young, 22 or younger, has been born after they had found the first extraterrestrial planet and after they found the first possible Goldilocks planet, which I think changes the perception of everyone, Linda.
And you're making the perfect point that we actually went through the 20th century with this archaic, bizarre notion that was being taught in schools, that the only life in the universe was on this planet, and that the planets in this solar system were the only ones like Earth in this entire 13.9 billion light-year universe. To think that academics for centuries have accepted these ideas is almost incomprehensible, and that as we've moved into the 21st century and at year 16 in this 21st century, it is beginning to feel like so many old ideas are being broken open socially, politically, scientifically, psychologically, and that's why I feel exhilarated. I have always honored the truth, the pressure of fact, more than anything else. And to have been alive realizing that the government of the United States has been lying through its teeth since World War II for reasons that are still not quite clear, and that we have grown up in a country so schizophrenic about what is truth, and that is what is fueling this current strange presidential year. People are totally aware that we are in a government that has lied and lied and lied and keeps on lying, and how can the United I feel like everything is just about to spring open and begin on a whole new frontier, quite literally, that we have been through the last several decades since World War II of secrecy, government hiding, back engineering of technology that none of us have seen, And something is happening in 2016 as if there is a pivot in the timeline. Everybody is feeling it. There's more and more whistleblowers that are coming to me and to others. In the year when this government and other governments may finally announce to the entire planet that we're not alone in this universe. And that is thrilling to me. That much is thrilling.
Who are they to tell us, our government, what's better for us or what we could know or what we shouldn't know? And as you mentioned, people coming out now with stories of their participation in government, all these government
on this planet. And are we finally in the 21st century going to go through some kind of a liberation, an actual liberation from all of the lies?
One thing that bothered me so much specifically about this country versus anywhere else in the world, when this topic comes up of intelligent life from other planets, other solar systems, possibly even other galaxies, that obviously to other countries, they take it seriously, they've been taking it seriously, or they just didn't quite believe as much as some of the hardcore believers here did 20, 30, 50 years ago. But they never instituted the ridicule system that America had. And one thing that I've seen that's been great change is every documentary I've watched from the early 80s throughout the 80s, throughout the 90s, and it was about mid-2000s when I first watched the Ancient Aliens 2-hour special, right? And in that, of course, there were skeptics in there. There was this
States of America continue in through the 21st century if we don't get out of the business of lying and we get back into the business of truth and absolute clarity and a nation in which the masses of, by, and for the people are exactly what the government was intended to be, which we are so far from now. And that part of this whole huge underbelly of all the government lies and the disrespect that everybody feels now goes right to the heart of suppressing and lying about other life forms and alien presence on this planet, throughout this solar system, throughout the universe. And the more I think about it, the more it is like a Dr. Strangelove Voltairian satire. How could the people on this planet have been kept for so long under the control of a handful of people who had power, and the power was derivative from, and that's the question mark, derivative only from gold on Earth or derivative from some link to the alien presence